My waiter dropped a note with the check that said, "Leave through kitchen, now." I looked up confused, and he pointed at my drink, then mouthed the words, "Your date drugged it." When I stood up to leave, my date grabbed my wrist, and everything I thought I knew about online dating changed forever. My name is Brooke Sullivan. I'm 27 years old, and I work as a marketing coordinator in Portland. The man sitting across from me that night was Tyler Grant. At least that's what his dating profile said. He was 30, claimed he worked in finance, and seemed perfect when we matched 2 weeks earlier. The person who saved my life was Marcus Rivera, a 25-year-old waiter and college student who was brave enough to get involved when he saw something wrong. My best friend and roommate, Shayna, had pushed me to start dating again after my breakup, and my older brother, Kevin, who's a police officer, had warned me to be careful meeting strangers online. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button, because this story might just save your life someday. 6 months before that night, I ended a 4-year relationship with my high school sweetheart, David. The breakup was mutual and friendly, but it left me feeling completely lost. I'd been with him since I was 21, and suddenly I was single and had no idea how to date as an adult. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with my best friend Shayna, who's a graphic designer and has always been the more outgoing one between us. She kept telling me I needed to get back out there and meet people, but I wasn't ready. I threw myself into work instead, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office to avoid thinking about being alone. 3 weeks before the incident, Shayna finally convinced me to download a dating app. I was really hesitant because the whole thing felt overwhelming and kind of scary. She sat with me while I set up my profile and promised she'd help me screen any matches. That's when I matched with Tyler Grant. His profile looked great. He said he worked in financial consulting, loved hiking and trying new restaurants, and was looking for something serious, not just casual dates. His photos showed him at mountain trails, at nice restaurants, always smiling and looking friendly and normal. We started messaging, and the conversations flowed easily. He asked thoughtful questions about my job and my interests. He seemed genuinely kind. After a week of talking, he suggested we meet for dinner at Rosewood Bistro, a nice Italian place downtown. I told both Shayna and Kevin about the date. Kevin immediately went into protective big brother mode and offered to run a background check on Tyler. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid. Shayna was excited for me and helped me pick out a nice outfit, a blue dress that wasn't too formal but still looked put together. Friday night arrived and I was actually nervous in a good way. I met Tyler at the restaurant at 7, and he was already there waiting, which I appreciated. He looked exactly like his photos, maybe even better in person. He was wearing a nice button-down shirt and jeans, and he greeted me with a warm hug that felt appropriate, not too forward or awkward. We were seated at a corner table with candles and soft lighting. The conversation started flowing immediately. Tyler asked about my marketing work, my hobbies, my family. He shared stories about his job and mentioned he had a younger sister he was close with. He talked about wanting to travel more and asked where I'd always wanted to go. Everything felt easy and natural. After about 30 minutes, I actually texted Shayna under the table saying the date was going really well and that she'd been right about giving this a try. We ordered appetizers to share and then our main courses. Tyler suggested getting a bottle of wine, but I said I'd prefer just one glass since I'd driven myself there. He ordered a cocktail for himself and a glass of white wine for me. Our waiter, Marcus, was friendly and attentive. The food was delicious, and Tyler told this funny story about a camping trip that went wrong, and I found myself laughing genuinely for the first time in months. I started thinking maybe this could actually turn into something real. Maybe online dating wasn't as scary as I'd thought. Tyler excused himself to use the restroom after our food arrived. He was only gone for a few minutes. When he came back, he immediately asked if I'd tried my wine yet. I said no, that I'd been waiting for him so we could toast together. He smiled and raised his glass, and we toasted to new beginnings and first dates. I took a small sip of the wine and noticed it tasted slightly bitter, a little off, but I figured it was just the particular type they'd served. Tyler was watching me drink with this intense focus that made me slightly uncomfortable for a second, but I brushed it off as him just being attentive. We continued talking, and everything still seemed perfectly normal on the surface. Tyler asked about my apartment and whether I lived alone. When I mentioned Shayna, I noticed this quick flicker of something across his face, almost like disappointment, but it passed so fast I thought I'd imagined it. He started asking more specific questions about where exactly I lived, what floor my apartment was on, whether the building had good security. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation, maybe even showing concern for my safety. But looking back, those questions felt loaded with meaning I didn't understand yet. About 10 minutes after I'd taken that sip of wine, Marcus came back to our table to check on us. He asked if we wanted to see the dessert menu, and Tyler immediately said yes, suggesting we share the tiramisu. I agreed, even though I was getting pretty full from dinner. Marcus cleared some of our plates, and when he set down the check holder on the table, something strange happened. He made very direct eye contact with me and tapped the check holder twice with his finger before walking away. Tyler didn't notice because he was looking at his phone, scrolling through something with a slight smile on his face. I opened the check holder expecting to see our bill. Instead, there was a small piece of paper that had been torn from Marcus's order pad. Written in rushed, messy handwriting were the words, "Leave through kitchen, now." I stared at it completely confused, thinking it must be some kind of mistake or maybe meant for a different table. I looked up and saw Marcus standing near the bar area, and he was staring directly at me. He wasn't smiling anymore. His whole face looked serious, almost urgent. He subtly pointed at my wine glass and then very clearly mouthed words I could barely make out. "Your date drugged it." My heart completely stopped. I looked at Tyler, who was still casually scrolling on his phone like nothing was wrong. I looked back at Marcus, who gave me one firm nod and then pointed toward the back of the restaurant where I could see the kitchen entrance. My mind started racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. This couldn't be real. Tyler seemed so normal, so nice. We'd been having such a good conversation, but Marcus had absolutely no reason to lie to me. He was risking his job by getting involved like this. I thought about how Tyler had watched me drink that wine with such intense focus. I remembered the bitter taste that seemed wrong. I realized I'd only taken one tiny sip and suddenly felt incredibly grateful I hadn't drunk more. My hands started shaking so badly I had to put them in my lap under the table so Tyler wouldn't see. I needed to think clearly and figure out how to get out of this situation without Tyler realizing I knew what he'd done. I glanced at my wine glass again, still sitting there mostly full, and my stomach turned. Tyler looked up from his phone right then and smiled at me, and for the first time all evening, his smile looked completely wrong. It didn't reach his eyes. It looked fake and dangerous and predatory. He asked if I was feeling okay because I looked pale. I forced myself to smile back and said I just needed to use the restroom. I started to stand up, but Tyler reached across the table and gently put his hand on mine, suggesting we should order that dessert first and I could go after. His touch made my skin crawl. Every instinct in my body was screaming that something was very wrong. I sat back down, trying desperately to act normal and calm. Tyler signaled Marcus over and ordered the tiramisu plus another glass of wine for me. Marcus looked at me with clear concern in his eyes, but I couldn't figure out how to communicate with him without Tyler catching on. After Marcus walked away, Tyler started asking more questions about my living situation. He wanted to know if Shayna was home tonight. He asked what time I usually got home from work. He asked if my building had cameras in the hallways. Every single question felt like a trap. I told him again that I really wasn't feeling well and needed the restroom. Tyler offered to walk with me to make sure I was all right. I insisted firmly that I was fine and just needed a minute alone. When I stood up this time, I felt genuinely dizzy. Maybe that one sip was affecting me. Or maybe it was pure adrenaline and fear coursing through my body. Tyler stood up too and said he'd walk me there anyway. I told him no, more forcefully than I'd said anything all night, and walked toward the back of the restaurant. I could feel his eyes burning into my back the entire way. When I reached the hallway where the restrooms were, I saw Marcus standing right near the kitchen entrance. He made eye contact and jerked his head sharply toward the kitchen door. I looked back toward our table and saw Tyler sitting back down, but he was watching me closely with his phone in his hand. I had maybe seconds to make a decision. Do I trust this waiter I don't know? Do I go back and pretend everything's fine? My brother's voice echoed in my head with all his warnings about staying safe and trusting my gut. Marcus was still standing there waiting for me to choose. I saw Tyler start to stand up again like he was going to follow me. That's when I made my choice and turned quickly toward Marcus and the kitchen. Marcus immediately pushed open the kitchen door and pulled me inside. The kitchen staff barely looked up from their work, clearly used to Marcus bringing people through for whatever reason. He didn't slow down or explain anything to them. He just kept moving, leading me past the cooking stations where chefs were plating dishes, past the dishwashing area where someone was spraying down pans, straight toward a back door with a glowing exit sign above it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears and feel it in my throat. Marcus pulled out his phone while we were walking and asked for my name. When I told him I was Brooke, he asked if there was someone I could call to come pick me up right away. I immediately thought of Kevin. Marcus told me to call him right now, this second, while we were still moving toward the exit. He pushed open the emergency door, and we stepped out into a dark alley behind the restaurant. The cool night air hit my face, and I realized my whole body was shaking uncontrollably. I could barely hold my phone steady enough to find Kevin's number. I called Kevin, and he answered on the first ring, immediately asking if I was okay because I never called him this late on a Friday. I could barely get the words out. My voice was shaking so badly I didn't even sound like myself. I told him I was in the alley behind Rosewood Bistro, that my date had put something in my drink, and that I needed him to come get me right now. Kevin's entire tone changed instantly from relaxed to intense and focused. He asked if I was safe, if I was alone, if the guy had followed me outside. Marcus took the phone right out of my trembling hands and introduced himself to Kevin. He explained that he was the waiter who'd seen what happened and that we were in the back alley waiting. He promised Kevin he wouldn't leave me alone and that we'd stay right there until he arrived. Kevin said he was 15 minutes away and told Marcus to keep me on the line the entire time. While we waited in that alley, Marcus explained everything he'd seen. He said he'd been working as a waiter for 3 years and had learned to watch customers carefully, to notice things that seemed off. When Tyler went to the bathroom earlier, Marcus had been clearing plates from a table nearby. He saw Tyler come back from the restroom, but instead of sitting down right away, Tyler stood behind his chair for just a few seconds, with his back blocking the view of most of the restaurant. Marcus saw him pull something small from his pocket, saw his hand move quickly over my wine glass. It happened so fast, maybe 2 seconds total, that Marcus almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. But then Tyler sat down and immediately asked me if I'd tried my wine yet, and Marcus knew for certain what he'd witnessed. He told me he'd seen something similar happen once before at a different restaurant where he'd worked 2 years ago. That time he hadn't said anything because he wasn't completely sure, and he found out later that the woman ended up in the hospital. He said he'd promised himself he'd never stay quiet again if he saw something suspicious. Suddenly, the back door of the restaurant burst open, and Tyler was standing there. He didn't look charming anymore. His face was tight with anger, and his eyes looked cold. He said I'd left my purse at the table and he was worried about me, but he was holding my purse in this threatening way, like he was using it to control the situation. Marcus immediately stepped directly in front of me, blocking Tyler's path, and told him the kitchen area was staff only. Tyler completely ignored Marcus and spoke to me, saying we should go back inside and finish our nice date, that he'd already ordered my favorite dessert. His voice sounded too calm, too controlled, like he was working hard to sound normal. I found my voice and said I was leaving, and I wanted my purse back. Tyler took a step closer to us. Marcus pulled out his phone and said he was calling the police right now. Tyler's entire expression changed in an instant. The fake calm disappeared, and I could see pure rage on his face. He looked at me with such hatred and said I was making a huge mistake, that I had no idea who I was messing with, that I'd regret this. Right then, headlights flooded the alley. Kevin's truck came around the corner fast and screeched to a stop. He jumped out, still wearing his police uniform from his shift. He positioned himself immediately between Tyler and me, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. He asked Tyler for his full name in his cop voice. Tyler's whole attitude shifted again. He said there'd been a misunderstanding, that we were just on a date. Kevin asked for identification. Tyler hesitated and said he'd left it in his car. Kevin radioed for backup and told Tyler he wasn't going anywhere. Within minutes, 2 more police cars pulled into the alley with their lights flashing. One of the officers asked Tyler to empty his pockets. Tyler pulled out his wallet, his keys, his phone, and then a small Ziploc bag with 2 white pills inside. Tyler immediately tried to claim the pills were prescription medication for anxiety, but when the officers asked him to show them a prescription bottle or any documentation, he couldn't produce anything. One of the responding officers, a woman named Officer Chen, picked up the baggie carefully and examined the pills under the alley light. She looked at her partner and said they looked like Rohypnol, a drug commonly used in sexual assaults. Tyler's face went completely white, and he started talking fast, insisting this was all just a big misunderstanding, that I was overreacting to nothing, that he'd never put anything in my drink, and I was being dramatic. The officers weren't buying it. They asked me if I was willing to give a statement about what happened. I said yes, absolutely. I'd tell them everything. They asked Marcus the same question, and he immediately agreed, providing detailed information about exactly what he'd witnessed, the timing, the way Tyler had positioned himself to block the view while doing something to my drink. Officer Chen went back inside the restaurant and returned a few minutes later carrying my wine glass carefully in an evidence bag. She said they'd need to test it to confirm what substance was in it. Kevin stood next to me the entire time with his jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. I could see him struggling not to say or do something he'd regret as a police officer. One of the officers asked me gently if Tyler had touched me inappropriately or if I'd actually drunk any significant amount of the drugged wine. I explained that I'd only taken 1 small sip because the taste seemed off, and that thanks to Marcus, I'd gotten away before Tyler had the chance to do anything else. The officer told me how lucky I was, and that the single sip probably wouldn't have been enough to seriously affect me, but if I'd finished even half that glass, I would have been in serious danger within 20 minutes. Tyler was handcuffed and put in the back of a patrol car. As they were walking him away, he turned and stared at me with such pure hatred that I actually took a step backward. He said I'd be sorry for ruining his life over nothing. Kevin moved forward like he was going to go after Tyler, but his fellow officers held him back, reminding him he couldn't get involved personally. I was asked if I felt well enough to go to the police station to give my full statement, or if I needed to go to the hospital first. I said I wanted to go to the station right away while everything was still fresh in my mind. At the police station, a detective named Detective Morrison took my statement in a private room. She was kind but thorough, asking me to recall every detail of the evening from the moment I arrived at the restaurant. While I was giving my statement, she received information from another officer who'd run Tyler's identification. She looked up from her computer screen with a grim expression and told me that Tyler Grant wasn't even his real name. His actual name was Tyler Hoffman, and he had 2 prior arrests for assault in different states, one in California and one in Nevada. He'd been using dating apps under fake names and slight variations of his real identity to meet women for at least 2 years. The financial consulting job was completely made up. Some of the photos on his profile were actually him, but others had been stolen from random social media accounts. Detective Morrison told me I was the first woman who'd managed to get away before he could hurt me. She said 2 other women had come forward in the past 18 months with stories almost identical to mine, but there hadn't been enough physical evidence to prosecute because they couldn't definitively prove their drinks had been drugged, and too much time had passed for any tests to show results. This time was different. They had the pills found in Tyler's pocket. They had Marcus's eyewitness testimony of him putting something in my drink. They had my wine glass to test. They had Tyler's pattern of using fake identities. They had his previous assault charges. Detective Morrison said the prosecutor would absolutely take this case, and she was confident they'd get a conviction. I sat in that police station waiting room after finishing my statement, and the full weight of what almost happened just crashed over me like a wave. If Marcus hadn't been paying attention, if he hadn't been brave enough to write that note, if I hadn't trusted his warning and left when I did, I would have finished that wine. I would have felt confused and dizzy. Tyler would have offered to help me to my car, and I would have been completely helpless. The thought made me feel physically sick, and I had to run to the bathroom. Kevin found me there afterward and just held me while I cried. I took 3 days off work after that night, because I couldn't face going into the office and pretending everything was normal. Shayna stayed home with me, ordering takeout and just being there without asking too many questions or trying to force me to talk about it. Kevin came over every single evening after his shifts to check on me, bringing groceries and making sure all the locks on our apartment were secure. My parents called from Arizona where they'd retired, having heard what happened from Kevin. My mom wanted to fly up immediately, but I convinced her I was okay and had plenty of support around me. I deleted every single dating app from my phone. I couldn't even look at them without feeling sick to my stomach. The detective called a few days later to tell me that Tyler was being held without bail because he'd violated parole from a previous assault charge in California that I hadn't even known about. She said they were building a strong case, and with all the evidence they had, especially Marcus's testimony and the physical proof, the prosecutor felt confident about getting a conviction. 4 months later, I had to attend Tyler's trial. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done. 2 other women testified about their experiences with Tyler, and their stories were absolutely heartbreaking. He drugged them both, assaulted them, and then disappeared before they could properly identify him or get help. One woman had been so traumatized that she'd moved to a completely different state and changed her phone number. The other had struggled with depression and trust issues so severe that she'd needed intensive therapy. Hearing what they went through made me realize just how lucky I was that Marcus had intervened when he did. Marcus testified about exactly what he saw that night, speaking clearly and confidently, despite being nervous about being in court. The defense attorney tried to argue that Marcus was mistaken, that maybe Tyler was just adding sugar or sweetener to my wine, but the physical evidence of the Rohypnol found in Tyler's pocket completely destroyed that argument. The lab results from my wine glass confirmed the drug was present. Tyler was convicted on multiple charges, including attempted drugging, possession of a controlled substance with intent, and assault based on the other women's cases. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. When the sentence was read, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. Marcus and I stayed in touch after everything happened. He became a real friend, someone who understood what I'd been through because he'd been right there in the middle of it. We met for coffee about once a month, always during the day, and always in busy public places. Marcus told me that the experience had confirmed what he wanted to do with his life. He was finishing his degree in social work and planned to work in victim advocacy. I shared with him that I'd started volunteering with an organization that taught women about dating safety and recognizing dangerous situations. I gave talks at community centers about trusting your instincts, watching your drinks, and understanding that predators often seem completely normal at first. I always made sure to talk about the importance of bystander intervention and how people like Marcus, who choose to get involved instead of looking away, can literally save lives. It took me over a year before I felt ready to even think about dating again. When I finally did start seeing someone, I met him through mutual friends, not through an app. His name is Alex, and we took things incredibly slowly. I told him early on about what happened with Tyler, and Alex never once made me feel like I was being paranoid or overly cautious when I insisted on safety measures, like meeting in public or telling friends where we'd be. We've been together for 8 months now, and I'm slowly learning how to trust again. I still have moments where I get nervous. I still watch my drinks like a hawk. I still feel anxious sometimes when I'm on a first date with someone new, even though I'm only seeing Alex now. But I'm healing, and I'm stronger than I was before. I know I survived something that destroys other people, and I'm determined to use that experience to help protect others. That night at Rosewood Bistro changed my entire life, but it doesn't define who I am. I think about Marcus constantly, about the split-second decision he made to get involved when he easily could have just looked away and minded his own business. I think about how close I came to being another statistic, another woman whose story ends tragically instead of with escape and justice. I'm 29 now, and I'm still learning how to navigate dating in a world where dangerous people hide behind charming smiles and carefully crafted profile. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this. Always watch your drinks from the moment they're made until you finish them. Trust your instincts even when everything seems fine. And never be afraid to leave a situation that feels wrong even if you can't explain why. And if you're ever in a position like Marcus was, where you see something that looks suspicious or off, please speak up. You might save someone's life. The most dangerous predators are the ones who look and act completely normal, and that's exactly what makes them so effective. If this story made you think about your own safety or inspired you to pay more attention to the people around you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stay safe out there, trust yourself, and remember that it's always better to be overly cautious than to ignore the warning signs.